welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here with Craig. Craig, welcome back to the show. Do you mind reintroducing yourself to everyone out there listening?
Thank you, Robbie. It's a pleasure to be back. My name is Craig Ciccone. I'm an independent historian based out of Detroit, Michigan. And I've been doing this for the last 30 years, both JFK and RFK. And as we've talked about in other episodes of your podcast, your wonderful podcast, the life and death of Fred Hampton. So been in deep with this for quite a while.
We've done the gambit of conversations when it came to political assassinations for sure, but we have done extensive discovery talks about JFK assassination witnesses. You have probably one of the best maps out there when it came to the master list of witnesses who were in Dealey Plaza to see the JFK assassination, or just people around in the area that gave a story, even to newspapers, FBI files, things that a lot of people should use as a reference base when it came to the witnesses that were there. But I wanted to talk about your witness list for the RFK assassination and documenting the ones that you have either in the pantry or just in the Ambassador Hotel that gave a statement to the police officers, because now I'm trying to make a witness video clips to try and document some of those things. And I'm realizing that there's a lot more people in the pantry than I guess anyone could really initially think based on the photographs and available documentation that we do have online, things that you can see from videos or photographs. So was it a surprise for you?
It was mainly because of all of the public pronouncements by all of the talking heads or all the pundits who were in charge of the investigation or being spokespeople for the investigation, claiming that certainly it was a public event, it was very crowded, and there was a lot of confusion. But there were only, the kitchen pantry was a very, very small room. And so to even put a number on it is difficult. Part of the problem is the investigators themselves would disavow many of the witnesses who said they were in there, because they claimed that a lot of people were publicity seekers. So they claimed they were in the pantry and saw something that they really didn't see. It was one of the many countless indications of how poorly it was investigated and how the LAPD specifically treated the witnesses that they did come in contact with, whether it was directly because they knew they were there or because they had been mentioned by other people as having been there. So they go through this investigation, and if things were inconvenient or things were a little too difficult to really establish as far as people's presence in the pantry, then they simply gave up and said, no, they really weren't there. They didn't see what they saw. Even though some of them, in some of the most egregious cases, they actually had photographs that they had taken in the pantry, so it proved that they were there. But anyway, that's we can get into specifics of that. But yeah, so I was surprised initially that there were so many people. But then knowing what I know about the Kennedys, specifically John and Robert, more so Robert, just wanting to be near the people, letting people get near him. Just in the campaign trail of 1968 alone, all of the, well, I was going to say abuse, but it's that makes it seem more malicious than it really is. People just clamored to see him in droves, wanted to touch him, wanted to, tussle his hair. It was the same thing at the pantry. This was a victorious night. He had won the primary, and was on his way to Chicago to hopefully get his party's nomination for president of the United States, or to run for president of the United States. So there were a lot of people there. They had to, even the fire chief had to shut down some of the entrances and exits because so many people were just packed into, well, the Ambassador Hotel as a whole, but specifically the embassy room where he was giving his victory speech, and all of the other ancillary rooms. So the fact that he was so adored, the fact that he wanted people to be close to him, as I said, initially it was surprising that so many people were there, but then you realize, in the context of what was happening at the time and who that person was, it really wasn't surprising.
When we look at witnesses and the statements that they made, do you believe that some witnesses just misremembered or something like that? Or do you believe that there kind of testimony was coerced. We know about the statement from, or the tape of Hank Hernandez of the LAPD interrogating Sandy Serrano and kind of getting her to change her statement that she didn't see this woman. And now, look, initially I thought there was only a couple people that saw a person in a polka dot dress, and now I'm realizing there's a lot more people that saw someone in a polka dot dress. Whether it's the same person, but it seems like the statements that I've been able to find have all stated that this girl said, "We've shot Kennedy." So that's very, very specific. It's not necessarily, I understand people were wearing multiple types of polka dot dresses there, but that's a very weird statement. And I don't think every single one of those people in a polka dot dress had said those words. Another one I want to mention was Catherine Keir. She was a student group member that was there for supporting Kennedy. Her statement goes on to say that initially she stated that she saw a woman in a black and white polka dot dress, ran by her and stated, "We shot Kennedy." However, when she was re-interviewed in the presence of her parents, she retracted her former statement and explained that she is not certain what the woman said. So there's these issues that come up, and it's came up in 5 or 6 different witness statements now. And some of them don't have parents. They were older and they gave a statement, but it says when they were re-interviewed, her statement had changed or her memory wasn't clear, or she really couldn't identify Sirhan as having a shooter or being a shooter. And you get into this, I'm like, is somebody fiddling with the statements? Are they getting interrogated rather than being questioned? Are they just getting forced to change their statements or misremembering or saying maybe you didn't remember this at all? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
Well, just from that scenario alone, it shows you that what seems like very minimal things can change someone's even motivation to give their statement or to give a truthful statement. So if you do have a young person, and there were a lot of young people there, you're talking about these groups for Kennedy, there were lots of different volunteer groups that were there because this, of course, the Ambassador Hotel was his headquarters for his campaign in California, so or the West Coast. So there were a lot of young student groups there, a lot of 16, 17-year-olds. And so, yes, so when they have something as traumatic as being interviewed by law enforcement, well, yes, okay, initially they're going to say something, but then their parents show up, and who knows what the dynamic between them and their parents are. But just the presence of their parents could either make them so nervous that they change their testimony to say, well, okay, I'm really not sure what I saw. And that is a part of coercion. And I don't doubt for a minute that in many instances the LAPD used that exact thing as a tactic, because the the person in question might want to have told the truth or gotten involved or taken this as far as it needed to go, but the parents don't want to get involved, or they don't want their child to be associated with this. So that it goes back to your initial question about eyewitness statements, and of course it's an overall perspective about eyewitness statements and it's in their truthfulness, that plagues the JFK assassination. Well, plagues any case, really. How reliable is eyewitness testimony? Well, we can go back and forth about the scientific and the academic discussions about how reliable they are and in what situations. But what it comes down to is the eyewitness statements are only part of the overall evidence of the case that you're trying to make. It is one of many factors that you use to establish a crime, in this case, a crime. And it's up to us as citizens to review that record and to not just assess the eyewitnesses themselves, but the investigators who are asking the questions. You talked about Sandy Serrano. This wasn't a case of them trying to change her testimony. She was, well, not to put too fine a point on it, she was abused. She could have turned around, at least in this day and age, if we had transferred their behavior of her to today, she could have sued them easily for mistreatment and mental and psychological abuse. That's how bad Hank Hernandez wanted her to change her story and believed that he could manipulate her into changing a story that was inconvenient for the LAPD and what they were committed to find.
I believe he said, "You're going to be a mother one day. Do you want your kids to feel shame because their mother lied," or something of that sort?
Absolutely. I mean, that's just preposterous. That has nothing to do with an impartial investigation to get to the truth of this political murder. So We have other cases of that and other examples of that, and subtle ones, just like bringing your parents into the interrogation room and let's see how you stand up to that. Um, so in both cases, it is very important to review the motivations and the behavior of the interrogators. Okay, so not all of this it falls on the witnesses and how believable or truthful were they. That obviously is incredibly important to assess the veracity, but it's also the interrogators and what in fact they were trying to do and how were they doing it and how transparent was it and how closely did it comport with the standards of policing and interrogation and questioning? Because it really shouldn't have been an interrogation. These are eyewitnesses to a horrible crime. They should be interviews, not interrogations. And their decision at the outset to apply lie detector tests or polygraph tests to some of these witnesses, if I mean some of these witnesses, it was enough witnesses to really raise eyebrows. If you're stuck in something, certainly giving a polygraph test to Sirhan, the alleged assassin, that makes sense. But to apply polygraph tests to eyewitnesses, that means you're just not doing your job. You're either trying to discredit what it is they're saying, or you give polygraphs to every single person that you interviewed, and they touted that we interviewed 4,000 people. Well, you can't really do polygraphs on 4,000 people. So what is your process for selection then? Who are you choosing to polygraph and why? And are even these polygraphs being given in a professional way with licensed people and licensed people who can interpret it and interpret it in the right way? So yeah, just like with the JFK case, the RF case is replete with witnesses who gave their statements, gave them dutifully and honestly as they could remember it. And then you've got the LAPD who's matching them, line for line, trying to get them to either recant or change or, I may not have remembered it that way. So it's very frustrating.
There's I'm just going to share this real quick just so anyone listening can see. Um, but this is the Catherine Keir testimony I'm talking about here. But it says right here, a 14-year-old Catherine Keir initially stated that a woman dressed in a black and white polka dot dress ran by her and stated, "We shot Kennedy." However, when she was re-interviewed in the presence of her parents, she retracted her former statement and explained that she is not certain what the woman said. It could have been he shot Kennedy or they shot Kennedy. She only had a glimpse of the woman and therefore would not be able to identify her. Then it says even more, it's like she initially thought that they saw Sirhan in the hotel the night of the assassination, also retracted much of their earlier observations about the only thing that really made an impression on them was the person they saw just didn't seem to be dressed properly for the occasion. There's multiple accounts of June 4th or June 3rd that night they had seen somebody, some shabbily dressed men and a woman that fit with the dress and everything in the hotel. And then some of them claimed it was Sirhan, said later they could confirm it was Sirhan because they saw his picture in the newspapers. But when it comes to witness statements, we have situations like Donald Schulman, which can be chalked up to a conspiracy theory because you can't find a recorded or thing interview with him. What you do have is in the Second Gun documentary, there is an interview that Ted Chirac did with Donald Schulman, and then they played the live recording when he was mentioned on the newscast when it happened, which later his account was discounted not only by the police, but discounted by his own news people. That would just be a conspiracy theory without that video and that documentation. With the RFK cases, all the audio and video evidence we could possibly ever want in the JFK case, but we got it in the RFK case, which makes it even more baffling how a lot of this was able to pass on without people glossing over and thinking about it and things getting tossed up as conspiracies. But that's also what happens if you delete a whole witness and what he saw. He was the only one that correctly identified the number of shots in the pantry and gave basically 2 out of the 3 things he stated were 100% fact, when everyone else was reporting it was only 2 shots to Robert Kennedy, when it was really 3.
Absolutely. So you're talking about Donald Schulman, and he was being interviewed by Jeff Brent. Jeff Brent was a reporter from Continental News. And speaking of Ted Chirac's documentary, The Second Gun, I was just watching it last night, and it wasn't just, and I wrote it down too. It wasn't just that Brent interviewed Schulman, because that's what he's known for. Um,
Brent also interviewed a French person right afterwards as well too, a French journalist.
yeah, I've written down that the controversy surrounding Jeff Brent had less to do with him as a witness and more to do with his um, interviewing Don Schulman. But in the audio tape, Jeff Brent's audio tape, he says a couple of things. One is that he was near the senator, even though the LAPD says that he was not in the pantry. But then he goes on to say, after a few other things, because this was immediately after the shots, he is announcing, just like in the JFK case, and I can't remember the journalist who was doing it, but he went on air and it had just happened, and so he was very flustered, very out of breath. Jeff Brent, the same thing. He said that I was near the senator. We heard the shots. He says a couple of other things, and he says, "You heard it as it happened." So was he broadcasting or was he recording? Was he another person who had a recording of the actual shots themselves? That's unclear, and I'm not recalling any other researcher who in fact unearthed whether or not that was true. But your point to the audio and the photos that were taken at the time in the pantry, that was very closely controlled by the LAPD. And there are a lot of things that we don't know as far as who was interviewed at what time and what recordings we do have, because the LAPD didn't bother to even make sure that they listened to and transcribed and cataloged all of the materials that they did get. That which they didn't destroy, they may have kept, but they didn't transcribe, they didn't listen to, or they didn't give them to an audio specialist for them to listen to. So there are still many, many things that we can't know at this point because of the suppression and destruction of the audio and photographic evidence of the LAPD. But absolutely, Don Schulman is a fascinating story and one of the most consistent witnesses that I've ever seen. JFK case, RFK case. As a matter of fact, there are more truly consistent eyewitnesses in the RFK case than even in the JFK case. And Don Schulman is one of them.
Now, what about the number of shots? There's certain witnesses that stated they only heard four. Some witnesses said they heard seven. Some witnesses said they heard nine. Some witnesses said they heard 11. I mean, the shots range so wildly.
They do, and this goes back to the unreliability, or I guess the essential unreliability of eyewitnesses and eyewitness recollection. Um, so many things were happening. It was already chaotic before the shots even happened, and people. It is not hard to understand that people. Let's just give you, for instance, this is not any witness in particular, but let's just say this. So they're in a very crowded room. There are a lot of, well, of other, with everything else going on, there are a lot of balloons because it's celebratory. They drop balloons from the ceiling. So there are balloons all over the place. So if you start hearing pops, knowing where you are and knowing that, with all of the other chaos around you, hey, those are balloon pops, right? But then you hear somebody scream, or you see smoke rising to the ceiling, or you even get a glimpse of a man with a gun in his hand. Immediately your brain says, wait, no, those are shots. And now you're only associating the noises that you hear from that point on as gunshots. So maybe you heard 8 balloon pops before you realized, oh wait, no, those were gunshots.
William Weisel's a good example, the witness that was hit, because he talked about that he thought it was balloons popping, and then someone mentioned to him that he had been shot, and he looked down and saw that he was shot.
Yeah, he was a very large man and he got shot in the abdomen. So if it's a soft tissue wound and with all the other chaos and everything else going around, I guess it wouldn't be surprising that he didn't know that he was shot. You know, but yes, that's an excellent example. And I think a lot of people were in that mindset. So you're going to get ranges of people saying four or saying 12 or 13. But this is why I go back to my original statement that eyewitness statements are only a part of the evidence that either lead credence to or discount whatever um, final conclusion you're reaching. So do we trust the four shots? Well, no, because whether Sirhan any of his bullets hit Kennedy, and that's the whole controversy, he emptied his revolver. So we know there were eight shots, right? So somebody who said, "Oh, I only heard four," does that mean they're lying? Does that mean they're unreliable in all of their other statements? No, because we have other evidence that corroborates eight shots. Now you take it from that, and we have indisputable evidence that there were no less than 13 shots in the pantry because we do have an audio recording of it. So, so just does that mean everybody who didn't say 13 shots is again wrong or they're not reliable or no, not necessarily.
I'm going to ask what your opinion is on the reliability of two things here. One is going to be the number of witnesses that stated that Sirhan was in front of Robert Kennedy when the shots rang out. And the second one is when we really examine the number of people that stated that they had their hands on Sirhan's gun. I've came across about 9 different witnesses now that talked about taking Sirhan's gun. Rosie Greer is one of them, which is probably the most believable to me. But he said he grabbed the gun, got it away, and then someone took it from him. But I have another reporter that was standing on trays that talked about, I think it was Bob Thomas, talked about having his hand on the gun. It seemed like there were at least 7 or 8 different people I've came across that talked about taking Sirhan's gun from his hand. Now, Sirhan had one gun, and that gun was being slammed onto a cage or whatever, one of the tables. So I'm just curious, the reliability of witnesses that stated Sirhan was in front compared to the statements of reliability of people that said that they had their hands on Sirhan's gun. What would be your opinion on both of those? And also, how do you go with the reliability if you're accepting one over the other?
Well, that's a very interesting question because it is this is one of those things, one of those elements of the case that is very hard to absolutely recreate or say for certainty that it went down like this. I think you're correct in at least your implication that there were some people who might have wanted the I guess you would say the reputation, not the reputation, um, but wanting to be known as one of the people who helped subdue RFK's killer. So you've got a lot of people now in the pantry. When the shooting happened, now you've got a lot of convergence on the shooter himself. So you've got a lot of people trying to help. They were jumping on top of the steam tables as well. So you've got a surge of activity. And that makes eyewitness testimony also difficult to parcel out. I do. Well, yes. So Rosie Greer is one of the ones that has been very consistent, and because he was one of Robert Kennedy's bodyguards, absolutely, I'm going to give credence to his statement. Also, the maitre d' who was leading Kennedy through the pantry, from the stage through the pantry on their way to the colonial room.
Carl Euchre?
Carl Euchre. Because he's one of the most consistent eyewitnesses I've ever come across. And I suppose that as Carl Euchre, so having first subdued Sirhan, all of a sudden this very, very large bodyguard of RFK's comes onto the scene, rushing onto the scene. Well, of course you're going to acquiesce. And I think that's at the time that Carl Euchre didn't let go of him, but didn't no longer had Sirhan in a stranglehold. He let other people do that. So you've got some people saying that they fell to the ground and got his legs, wrapped their arms around his legs, Sirhan's legs. Other people are punching him. Other people are trying to wrestle the gun from his hand because, of course, he's still shooting. And there were witnesses that say that he continued to pull the trigger even though he had already shot. He had emptied his revolver. So it's just your instinct to try to get the gun away, even though it was empty and it posed no more danger. Um, so yes, there were a lot of people who helped subdue Sirhan, and were surprised at how strong this 5'5". Um, I mean, he was a small man. His build as well, not just his height. How strong he was, and how much difficulty they had getting the gun away from him. Who was the gentleman? It might have been Jesse Unruh that you hear on an audio tape saying, um, no, it was probably the reporter who had the tape rolling. Anyway,
I know Glenn H. Migby, I think his name is the one that talked about break his thumb, break it,
yep,
break it. Yeah.
that's what I was referring to. Yep. So break it if you have to. Right, break his thumb. so
That's a
um,
clip I did, by the way.
that's one of the ones I didn't see. I'm very sorry about that. Uh, so there was a report that Sirhan had dropped the gun and then picked it back up. Then you're twisting it out of his hand, and it was Rosie Greer who finally got the gun. And as everyone else is pinning Sirhan against the table, he hands it to Rayford Johnson, who was a former Olympic athlete and another bodyguard for Robert Kennedy. And it was Johnson who had the gun, who then finally gave it to the LAPD. So um, as far as I'm concerned, as far as what we know for sure, there were only really three people who actually had possession of the gun at any given time. One was Carl Euchre, the other one was Rosa Greer, and the other one was Rayford Johnson. Other than that, did other people touch it? Did other people, uh, try to wrestle it from Sirhan's hand and actually had their hands on it? Sure, but in the end, it was Carl Euchre at first, then it was Rosie Greer, and then it was Rayford Johnson.
I'm going to play this. I haven't played it before, but since you've mentioned the audio recording a few times, I figured I might as well play.
I'm sorry, Robbie, before you do that, because I wrote it down and I'm glad I did. You, the first question that you had was about the witnesses who say
Sirhan
where
was in front.
Sirhan was in front. Exactly. Um, so yeah, the people who were closest to the actual event are all very consistent in saying that Sirhan was always in front. And then we get into the how far away was he? And then you have a little bit more. It's still a huge. It still conflicts with the ballistics and the autopsy report, which established how far the gun was away. But then you have differences in how far the gun was away, but it was still more than a foot. Some people said a foot, some people said 2 to 3 feet, some people said 5 to 8 feet. So I mean, now you've got just differences. But again, it's the autopsy that establishes how far the gun was away from Robert Kennedy's body at the time that he was shot. But without exception, all of the witnesses who saw it and reported it all said that he was in front of Robert Kennedy, which is exactly what Carl Euchre said, the maitre d'.
And I believe in the models, they even tried to have RFK turning to make it so it looks like if he would have had his back to Sirhan.
Absolutely, and crouching down because he would have had been turned around, his back facing Sirhan, and almost completely at a 90-degree bent over angle to accept the trajectories that Dr. Thomas Noguchi established through his autopsy. The problem is, if Robert Kennedy had contorted that way, he would have fallen on his face, not on his back. You simply cannot contort his body to get the bullets to enter his body from where Sirhan was at the angle and at the distance that Sirhan was, and not have him face down on the pantry floor when it was all said and done. But all the other witnesses say that his hands came up, which again, if he puts his arm up in a defensive motion because he sees the gun or hears the first shot, that is also established by the autopsy because Thomas Noguchi had to actually raise Robert Kennedy's arm on the autopsy table in order to get the probe to go from the entrance wound to the exit wound. He was tracking the trajectory of the bullet. So he actually physically had to lift his arm up to get the probe to go through. So we know his arm was up.
Well, we also know that it was 3 shots to the back of RFK's head, and we all know that from the statement of Carl Euchre that it was only 1 shot until Carl Euchre grabbed Sirhan's gun and was slamming it on the table by the second in the rest.
Yes. Yes. But even if you say, even if, because Carl Euchre also said in some interviews it was either the first or the second shot, definitely the second shot. But even if it was 3 shots that he had gotten off before he had subdued Sirhan's gun hand and pinned him to the top of the steam table, their positions, the distance of the gun was in front of Euchre's face, not in front of Robert's face. So even if he hadn't gotten the gun, he still would not have been in a position to have physically inflicted those wounds on Robert Kennedy's body.
I'm going to play the audio tape. I haven't played this version of it before, so hopefully it's the right one. Let me know if you can hear it.
Own recording of the actual gunshots was this recording made by Mr. Brzezinski, and which is somewhat ironic in that Brzezinski was not aware at the time he made the recording that he in fact was still recording. He had set up his microphone and his cassette recorder up at the podium area, had recorded Kennedy's victory statement, and after that had concluded, he came back up to the podium, collecting his microphone and his recorder, and as he was descending the stairs is the point at which the shooting began. He continued to walk into the entryway to the pantry as the shots continued. This is a poor recording, and that's unfortunate. I mean, it would have been lovely if this had been a high-quality recording made with professional equipment right on the scene and as it was happening in the kitchen pantry, but it's not. So we have to make do with what we have. Over this period of the last 3 years, what I found was basically 3 different discoveries. The first discovery was 13 shot sounds over a little bit over a 5-second interval of time. There are 2 shots and then a pause of about 1 1/3 seconds, and then a flurry of succeeding shots, then a number of screams and shouts from that pantry area. Let's just look at part of the shot sequence right up to the scream. The second discovery was that within those 13 shot sounds, there are 2 instances of what I call double shots. And those are 2 shots that occur so close together as to make it really very difficult to believe how they could have possibly come from a single gun. And in fact, last year when the Discovery Times channel hired a gun expert in California, rented an Ivor Johnson Cadet 55, which was the weapon that Sirhan had used, and had him under ideal conditions try to shoot it as fast as he could. And I guess the fastest 8-shot average was something like 366 milliseconds between shots. One of the double shots that I found was about 120, 122 milliseconds apart. The other was about 147, 148 milliseconds apart. So about 3 times faster than a gun expert, firing expert, was able to achieve under ideal conditions. And we must remember that at the time that the double shots occurred, Sirhan's gun wrist had been pinned down onto the steam table. If we consider the possibility of 2 guns being fired by 2 different individuals, then we could say that over that same period of time, we would have a random distribution in terms of the occurrence of the shots from those 2 guns, and the likelihood that we would have a couple of virtually overlapping shots occurring from those 2 guns. And that's in fact what we see in these 2 double shot occurrences. As we analyzed further and further, we found a similarity pretty much across the board amongst all of those shot sounds. However, we found one anomaly with 5 of the gunshots. One frequency presented at a higher level, at 1600 hertz, at one particular frequency. At a total loss for what that possibly could be coming from. So we did an independent firing range test using 2 different guns. An Ivor Johnson Cadet 55, the same that Sirhan had used. The other one was an H&R 922, the security guard, who was positioned immediately behind Kennedy. In fact, had Kennedy's right elbow with his left hand at the time, and was carrying a gun that evening. Happened to own an H&R 922 at the time of the shooting. That particular...
I'm not going to play the whole thing, but...
Oh, yeah. Even though, of course, it's fascinating. And just in that short clip, you saw the videotape and you saw all of those photographers on top of the steam table.
Yeah.
And just how people converged, not only from the ante room, which is right outside the pantry, but also the colonial room, which is on the other side of the pantry, and everyone coming in at once and just converging. So it was just mass confusion and chaos. And of course, if you played that whole clip, well, before I get into that, it's interesting that the similarities between the JFK case and the RFK case. You know, the FBI also test fired Lee Harvey Oswald's weapon and tried to recreate not only
that, they had top marksmen as well too that recreated for a CBS special that happened when the target was moving away at a speed less than what Kennedy's motorcade was going through. By the way, they didn't create the exact conditions, and they didn't even do it off the 6th floor. They did it off the 4th.
Right. Well, I'm talking about when they during the investigation, before the Warren Commission report was published, the FBI did their independent
at Aberdeen Proving Grounds.
Yes, exactly. So yes, in even better conditions, the same kind of gun, and
they had to mount it as well too. They had to have it on a stand to make it fire correctly, and they were afraid to fire it because it was going to fall apart.
Well, right. So the condition of the gun, that in and of itself, but so they were trying to recreate not only the speed but also the accuracy, and of course they couldn't do it. Only one marksman, one of the 3 in the 3 tries that they had, even got close. And it's the same thing with the RFK. They did a recreation in trying to see how fast that gun can be fired, and it's a dual action trigger anyway, so it really takes a lot of effort to pull that trigger because it's dual action. But Van Praag's analysis, he didn't just analyze the actual tape itself and digitize it and then analyze the tape. He also recreated his own sound tests in a similar kind of room, because of course the pantry didn't exist anymore because the Ambassador Hotel was closed and then demolished. But using he found the exact same kind of recorder that Brzezinski used, and the same kind of tape, and recreated the same kind of sound tests that they would do on like the gun, with the same kind of gun, so forth and so on. So, and you had other independent audio experts confirm Van Praag's findings. So there we established scientifically again the overwhelming likelihood that there were no less than 13 shots in the pantry. And after that, then you look at other evidence of more bullets being fired, because more bullets were in fact recovered, more bullet holes were discovered. So the whole 8-shot theory just does not stand up to the scientific and ballistic evidence.
How much do you believe, when it came to the evidence in the case that was destroyed, was a matter of politics getting involved into the whole scenario, especially when it came to Sirhan's trial?
That's an excellent question. I really don't know what the motivation was, because you're talking about a whole slew of so-called professionals, whether it was the LAPD, whether it was the LA County District Attorney, whether it was the Attorney General, whether it was the mayor of LA, whether it was the governor of California. I mean, it just goes right down the list of everybody, of all of these officials perpetuating the official line, the official version. And each one of them sternly saying that, well, we knew that these conspiracy theories would come out. That's why we did such an excellent investigation, and so forth and so on. So what is the motivation? Is it that they found something is it as dastardly as they found something that they knew that, well, much like in the JFK case, if the public knew, they would be outraged and incensed and would not stand for uh, whoever colluded in order to do this? Or was it just a matter of, we want to hide our own incompetence, our own, um, we wanted we wanted to close this case quickly for convenience sake, because we didn't want it to drag out. It is costly, it is manpower, and we don't want to have the same kind of reputation that the Dallas police ended up having after JFK in Dallas in 1963. Their motivations are quite difficult to pinpoint, and it depends on what you believe actually happened and the motivation behind the shooting itself. But yeah, the evidence does not play out at all as to how they said it happened. So all of the other dereliction in duty, of malfeasance, of well, we can't say it's incompetence. That I guess that would be unfair to all of the people who were competently doing their jobs, but unfortunately, the vast majority were not, and we're not interested in a full scale investigation, no matter where it led. And then, of course, after that, transparency. You did have the chief of detective, Robert Houghton, and you had the DA, Evel Younger, saying that we will release everything. We will be transparent, because there's no reason not to. And then, of course, it was 20 years until we even read their report, and even the report was heavily redacted. So, what's the motivation behind that? Because you look at the redactions, because now we have a clear copy. The redactions are no longer in place. What did they cut? What were they redacting? It had no bearing on the case whatsoever, or had no bearing on their reputation as law enforcement officials. So what was the motivation behind doing this? And it still just confounds me to this day that you still have people, whether it's in the Kennedy family or whether it's in government, saying, "Hey, the Warren Commission got it right." You know, the members of the Warren Commission are no longer alive. Very few of the main investigators from RFK's assassination are alive. So their motivation is still to this day quite perplexing.
I find that with the RFK assassination, more people believe conspiracy in that than they do the JFK assassination. It's surprising. I guess I must be talking about it a lot in my free time, but everyone sent me links when Trump declassified the JFK, RFK, and all that type of stuff, or put that order in, and they asked, "Oh, what do you think about the JFK stuff?" And I go, "I don't think we're going to really find anything. We might find a receipt for where the brain might be. Would be a cool interest of mine if they still had something like that, but it's been investigated 3 times, and each investigation that they had, whether it was the HSCA and all that, they destroyed documentation. That's well admitted that they destroyed documentation. The Secret Service had 6 filing cabinets that eventually got chalked down to 1, and there was a brain sample found of that was sent over to one of the medical institutes, the pathological institutes, and that had just disappeared. So I don't think a whole lot on the JFK one, but what I am hopeful for is I do think we're going to get a good amount of documentation on the MLK and the RFK. I know they're delaying it by 45 days after the JFK release happens, but I feel like with the RFK one, it's not as much talked about. It's a little lesser known, but if you ask anyone that does know about that incident or was around at the time, they do believe conspiracy in that. I do find that a lot with like a lot of older people, where they kind of roll their eyes at the JFK assassination. So I am hopeful on that front. But again, I mean, I'm going to share this real quick because I said I would. We had texted this back and forth, and I would like your opinion, mostly because if anyone's new out there researching the RFK assassination, I want them to have a good starting basis. I've been largely using the FBI LAFO files. You told me not to use those. You told me to use the special unit senator. I mean, you can use them, but yes, but the special unit senator seems to be recommended a little bit more. I had done a podcast with Larry Hancock about the whole RFK assassination. He also said that sus would be a good thing to look at, but I thought sus was suspicious because they didn't do certain things. So I was curious, maybe you could clear this up for a lot of people that would be new, that would be wanting to look at the documentation for themselves. Which one would you choose, and why would you choose that one over the other? And what information does it give you that can help anyone that would be new to the case, and also help your research as well too when it came to witnesses? What was exactly said, how to find out what was taken out, or what might have been not misconstrued, but taken as a sense of maybe you might be misremembering and maybe it should be like this. Because when you're reading these files, I'm trying to take them at that they at least took down the actual account of the witness. But again, you're coming across so many words like misremembering or changing statements, or we interviewed her the next day and she said something different. Where I go, unless I'm hearing them on a videotape, I don't know what to really trust. I'm kind of like going back and forth here and trying to write summaries.
No, that's an excellent point, and there's a lot to unpack. So forgive me if I forget some things. Keep me on this thread. More so with the RFK case, all of the statements by witnesses have to be taken at face value. There were many witnesses who had their interview recorded. Many of those recordings were destroyed. Many of the recordings were never transcribed. So when you go to the Mary Farrell Foundation website, and I highly, highly encourage every one of your listeners and viewers to go there and nothing else to make a donation. This is the absolute starting point for anybody who wants to get into the JFK, RFK, MLK case, because Mary Farrell, who was a longtime, highly renowned JFK researcher from day one, amassed a huge archive that when she died, she left it to be digitized and given public access to, just like this website. But this goes far beyond even, I think, what she could have imagined in her lifetime. So all of the major record groups of all of those investigations, of all those cases, those 3 cases, are on the Mary Farrell website. So you don't have to subscribe to access these things. It's just for convenience sake. There are tools here that if you subscribe or you donate to, you have access to other things and other nice tools that make it a lot easier than to click on one thing, go back, click on another thing.
Rex, give me a free membership, bro. I'm tired of this limited search results and stuff. And also, please make a database for the RFK witnesses, because you don't have one. You only have it for the JFK one. And also, when I click this, you got to label this better, buddy. I appreciate the work that you do, but good God, man. How am I going to know what any of this means?
Now go back.
Okay.
Okay. So you were talking about...
I'm sorry. It was pissing me off trying to
find... No. I didn't discourage you from looking at the FBI files in the RFK case. It's simply, if you want the investigative, the main investigative paperwork and statements and evidence and analyses, it's the LAPD. Look, the difference between the JFK and the RFK is, for the JFK assassination, the Warren Commission relied on the FBI to do their investigating for them. So, right, these 9 guys aren't going to, these old farts aren't going to do it themselves, right? Did I say 9? I meant 7. Aren't going to do it themselves. So they relied on the FBI to do their investigative work. Then they would analyze what the FBI came up with. In fact, they didn't analyze anything. They simply accepted what the FBI told them and then published it like that. With the RFK case, the FBI and the LAPD did separate investigations. The LAPD, or SUS, Special Unit Senator, was the primary investigative body. The FBI didn't do their work for them. I mean, they did do testing if they needed it, but for the most part, the LAPD, they were independent of each other. So you start with SUS, and then obviously there's overlap because the FBI and the LAFO stands for LA Field Office. It's that's obviously where the assassination happened. So that's going to be the home base for all of the files. That's what LAFO means.
Did you hear my laptop make that noise?
Yes. Yep.
I plugged it in and it said battery low.
But if you look on the right here, it's not just SUS, it's not just the FBI, it's also the Sirhan trial transcript. The entire trial is online that you can read. And there are witnesses who did, in fact, testify. So that has to be taken as part of it. Then you've got the appeal that Sirhan's team filed. after his conviction in 69, then a request to the Los Angeles grand jury in 1992 to reopen the case. So all of the efforts of individual researchers or independent researchers getting to a point where they say, we want a new trial, and then of course all of the other court documents having to do with Sirhan's appeal or trying to get a new investigation, his parole hearings, the documents from Paul Schrade, who was one of the victims standing right behind Robert Kennedy. He was one of the shooting victims, a very good friend of the Kennedy family. When he died, he donated his archive to them, and then of course miscellaneous RFK documents. So it's everything is right here, with exception of the books you can find on the RFK assassination, which I highly recommend, 3 in particular, but we'll get into that. So yes, everybody go to the Mary Farrell website. Please subscribe or at least donate so that we can assure that these kind of archives can continue to flourish and add new things. Because if there are any documents from the RFK after this executive order by President Trump, they're going to include it. They're going to get copies and they're going to digitize them and they're going to put them on this website, so you can do the reading yourself. So it's absolutely essential for anybody who wants to know more about the case.
Why would you choose SUS over the FBI?
Because because SUS did the actual investigation. The FBI simply did an ancillary background checks, trying to, well, much like Lee Harvey Oswald, if you're convinced that this is the person that did it, then of course you want to know why. So you get into Sirhan and his family's background, political, psychological.
Does that create a problem? Because if you're starting off with it is kind of Sirhan, we have Sirhan, he has the gun, nobody's conflicting with that, but a lot of their investigative procedures were into his background, his family, people that knew him from then, who had, of course, if you dig up with anybody's family, I'm pretty sure there's one person that we have in our family that has a criminal record of some sort. And that's kind of with the Sirhan stuff. When they're digging into the background, there was noticing a lot of things that kind of can seen as communistic or some type of Palestinian or whatever the hell the issue that's going on at the time. That was a largely focused thing. Where if you're reading the documents, they could all kind of read like, well, this is a lot of good evidence on Sirhan. It's like, well, they're only looking at one person. We're just saying expand the investigation to 2 shooters, and the other person that we suspect of doing never got an investigated background. We know that he worked at a rocket facility. We know that he was moonlighting there as a security guard. We don't know why. I understand he's a rent-a-cop, but he's not really lied, but he has admitted to having his gun out at the time of the shooting. He never said he fired back, but other people are saying he fired back. So there's a lot of conflicting things that were never investigated, things with the trial that were very, very suspicious, such things as entering the wrong gun as evidence compared to the gun that Sirhan actually used. A bullet fragments as well, too, certain striations on the bullets that what we've talked in previous episodes that didn't really make sense, and it seemed like shenanigans going on by Dwayne Wolfer. So there's a lot of things, even with the judge. It seemed like the judge was just kind of nodding his head and not stopping at certain points when it came to the Sirhan case.
Well, you're talking about the judge in the Sirhan case. Look, people have to realize that the Sirhan trial at that point, up until that point, was the most expensive in Los Angeles history. Had nothing to do with establishing whether Sirhan did it or did it alone. It was conceded by both the defense and the prosecution that he had done it. The entire trial was simply, was he going to get the death penalty or was he going to get life in prison? That was what the trial was about. When Thomas Noguchi's 62-page autopsy report wasn't even entered into evidence as an exhibit during the trial, then you know that it was staged. That is, it was for just to show that justice was going to be served and that the perpetrator of this heinous crime was really going to get his due. But no, if you can't establish somebody was dead, how can you establish that he killed him? But much like Lee Harvey Oswald, even though I firmly believe that he did not shoot anyone that day, the fact that he was mixed up in it, the fact that his gun was found there, the fact that he had an intelligence background, the fact that he lived in Russia and was able to get back without any problems whatsoever, is a telltale sign. His background is fascinating. Of course, you want to know about him, even if he wasn't the perpetrator. He was involved somehow. So how is it he was involved? How was he that patsy? How was he put into place? Who used him? So forth and so on. It's the same thing with Sirhan Sirhan. Again, in my mind, balls to bones. It's not a conspiracy. It's already been proven, or it's not conspiracy theory. It's already been proven by ballistics, medical evidence, and all of the other evidence that a conspiracy existed. That is, more than two guns were in the pantry shooting at the time. Sirhan shot 5 people. There's no doubt about that. But the fact that he may have been involved in a conspiracy, whether he was a Manchurian candidate, the fact that he couldn't remember and had to be under hypnosis even to remember any details, and even that was really fuzzy. Many psychologists believe that if under hypnosis you can't really recall something, something's wrong, because apparently it's not foolproof. I mean, I don't know enough about psychology and about hypnosis, but if you're under hypnosis, you pretty much can remember what you're subconsciously trying to block out. That wasn't the case with Sirhan Sirhan. The point is, he didn't kill Robert Kennedy, but he was involved. So if you're going into his background like the FBI did, obviously, how the hell did he get wrapped up in this? What were the connections between the Sirhan family and anyone who was involved in this? So you go into the background, you go into Sirhan, but the LAPD went into his background to justify a motivation for him killing Robert Kennedy. Once you take that out of the equation, then your investigation of him and his background and his family's background takes on a whole new significance.
I'm going to share this.
Okay.
From the Second Gun documentary. I think it's going to cover a good bit what we just said.
Physical evidence stands on its own. It cannot perjure itself. This is why, at the trial, Prosecutor David Fitz addressed the court in this manner.
Your Honor has heard Carl Euchre and any number of witnesses who attempted to describe what happened. One witness has put the muzzle of the revolver some 3 or 4 feet from the senator's head. Others have had it at varying ranges. The only way we can clear up whatever ambiguity there may be there and to show the truth is by the testimony of this witness. The man thus introduced was Los Angeles Police Department firearms expert Dwayne A. Wolfer.
4 days after the crime, Wolfer reported his first findings. Of the bullets fired at Kennedy, he said, a 4th shot pierced the right shoulder pad of his coat and proceeded into the ceiling. 1 month later, Wolfer turns in the official police summary of the trajectory study. He then reports, quote, bullet passed through the right shoulder pad of Senator Kennedy's suit coat, never entered his body, and traveled upward, striking victim Schrade in the center of his forehead. More than a year later, Special Unit Senator goes to press. There was ample time to verify all the evidence and to amend what may have seemed confusing to the reader. But no footnote was added to Wolfer's first report, so we must take it at face value. So here we have a bullet which, without any mention of ricocheting or fragmenting, can both proceed into the ceiling and be recovered from Paul Schrade's head. The case of this ubiquitous bullet could be better explained by theorizing that the ceiling and Schrade's head were penetrated by 2 different bullets. But then Sirhan's 8-shot revolver would have fired 9 bullets, to say nothing of an Associated Press photo captioned, "Bullet discovered in a door frame." There is also this other photograph showing 2 more bullet holes in another door frame. This would bring the total to 12 bullets.
This is the world's first reusable cotton
Don't you love
swab.
that?
It can remove up to 10 times.
But a lot of what was going on in that trial, obviously we know about the number of bullets, but we talk about their investigative procedures. I mean, a lot of stuff neglected, again, in the case when it came to the gun and a lot of the ammunition that really didn't make sense. Now, you've mentioned a couple of times about Sirhan has fired those shots. He hit 5 people. We believe, me and you believe, I'm sure others believe, Sirhan was one of the shooters. He fired shots. He didn't fire blanks. He hit people.
Right.
It would match with people slamming his hand on the table, the number of shots that started bouncing around, hitting ceilings, and doing stuff like that. The issue is that the people that were hit, William Wiesel, Paul Schrade, and others, had went to Sirhan's parole hearings, and they asked him, not asked Sirhan, but they asked the witnesses. I've seen interviews with William Wiesel and others talk about, yeah, if he shot me, I hold no hatred. He shouldn't be locked up any longer. We're talking about someone that's been locked up for 34, 35 years, and we're not discussing the fact that, all
Nearly
these people,
years.
yeah, well, all these people that have been dealing or had this trauma of this incident don't hold any hate or grudge towards him and actually are fighting for him to be free. And we're still just kind of neglecting the fact that there's a man sitting in prison right now, which is the main point for a lot of people. And I understand that's why it's also a point of contention when people want to say that Sirhan was firing blanks to make him look a little bit more innocent. I don't necessarily believe that. I mean, I get the theory behind it, and Elisa Pease puts some good work into that for sure. I just don't think it's a harder fight to sell at this point. I think at this point now we should be looking at the fact that there was a wrong misjustice towards a certain individual. He did do a crime, but the crime that he's being punished for necessarily isn't the crime that he was, I guess, persecuted for. So I think,
or that his name has been besmirched with, and his family's name. Well, much like Lee Harvey Oswald, whose daughters have had to live in basically as hermits in witness protection because of what their father supposedly did. But but now I've just lost the train of what you went on as far as the trial is concerned. But the clip that you played from the second gun, that was Ted Chirac, by the way, who is narrating it. Wolfer was not a ballistics expert. This really has to be clear. I don't know if he didn't know that, or if it was he just misspoke, or
I think that's what's listed on the FBI document.
Well, again, he was not a ballistics expert. His title for the LAPD was he was the chief criminologist, and that is a subspecialty of criminology. That is ballistics. Just like in the JFK case, the gentleman who did JFK's autopsy, actually the two, and then a third, but the main two, Humes and Boswell, yes, they could do autopsies. They could do anatomic, clinical autopsies. They could remove organs. They could weigh them. They could make assessments of skin and maybe some damage to skin. But they were not qualified as forensic pathologists. When you have a victim of a bullet wound or several bullet wounds, you need someone who is specifically trained to assess the characters of bullets and what they do to the body and what they do to bone and flesh and even cloth. So you need to have that expertise. Wolfer did not have that expertise in ballistics. He was a criminologist, which means that his expertise is very broad, right? And in fact, when he was in 1971, when he was, you could say, promoted, it was as chief chemist. So now, again, another subspecialty of the umbrella of criminology. He's a chemist. He didn't become a chief ballistics expert. And of course, cops are going to know about ballistics and about guns, about weapons, but they're not going to be experts in the study of the bullet fragments or whole bullets that were found to make comparisons. So that's why so much of Wolfer's work, all of it, in fact, has been called into question by other experts. So when Wolfer says that, yes, I took the bullets from the victim, I took bullets from the gun that was used, I compared the rifling and the signature impressions in the bullets that are made by that particular gun, and I compared them under microscopes, they were the same. That was not true. The comparisons that he made were from a test bullet or test gun that was fired, not Sirhan's gun. So right there, it wipes out any comparison to the victim's bullets. You're not establishing Sirhan's gun as the gun that fired the bullets that came out of Kennedy's body, because he's using a completely different gun. So just right there, is that incompetence? Is that malfeasance? Is that trying to cover up something? Or would you expect that out of a ballistics expert? That he used a completely different gun to test fire bullets, that he couldn't make comparisons microscopically, that he did not photograph those microscopic comparisons between the bullet and the test bullet, and that there's no record of him ever doing the test firing in his own work log. Is this the work of a ballistics expert? Absolutely not. So let's take Wolfer off of that pedestal, and I put him basically on the same kind of level as Dr. James Humes. That he knows somewhat of what he's doing, but he was put in a position that was entirely over his head and making authoritative statements that he had no expertise to make, all under the guise of a thorough investigation, but in the shadows of intimidating forces. For James Humes, it was the Navy, because he was a naval doctor. So the autopsy was being performed at the Naval Institute. So now he's got superiors to answer to. You've got the FBI, the Secret Service, and everybody else in the autopsy room at the same time. So already his independence in doing his job is completely thwarted. It's the same thing with Wolfer. And the sensationalism of the case, the pressure to get a conviction, certainly Sirhan convicted. Again, pressure and non-expertise leads to 60 years of questions of what really happened and how it happened.
Do you find that when it comes to the investigative procedures or the whole gloss over of the trial with Sirhan and the kind of conviction afterwards, did you ever find it strange that Vincent Bugliosi believed that there was conspiracy in the RFK case when we know him as such a diehard against the whole JFK thing?
Well, when you read it in 1975, and his efforts to have the case reopened and the evidence reassessed, the fact that he was interviewing witnesses and he was having tests conducted at the time, no, that's the kind of attorney he was. That's the kind of diligent attorney that certainly he had a reputation of being. But then fast forward to 1986 and Showtime doing a trial, a mock trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, in which he was the prosecutor. And so he believed that Oswald was the one who killed Kennedy, and he was trying to prove it. And then, of course, I can't remember what year it came out, just within the last 15 years, his 1,000-page tome on the John Kennedy assassination, in which, he declares that while the Warren Commission and the FBI may have screwed up some things, ultimately they got their conclusion correct, and that Lee Harvey Oswald did it and did it alone. Then I'm surprised. Retroactively, I'm surprised that he felt there was a conspiracy in Robert Kennedy's assassination. And I'm sorry that he didn't put the effort that he put into the JFK case into the RFK case, because every time he tried to establish that something was wrong in the LAPD's case and in the evidence that they claimed proved that the Sirhan killed Robert Kennedy, he was thwarted. And that should have been aggravating to him and frustrating to him, that he would continue that campaign moving forward and basically be unrelenting in his efforts, at the very least, to get the report released, the SUS's final report released, which again did not happen until the 1980s. So 20 years after the assassination, we had nothing on which to base our suspicions other than what we get out of the newspapers and many independent researchers like Ted Chirac and many others who picked up the ball and interviewed these witnesses about the evidence, so forth and so on. And you were mentioning the shooting victims that testified on Sirhan's behalf at his parole hearings. No one championed his release or a reinvestigation more than Paul Schrade. To his dying breath, he went to every parole hearing. He apologized to Sirhan, and like you said, I hold no grudge whatsoever. we were unintended victims. You did your time, but now it's time, um, in memory of Robert Kennedy. That's the least we can do for what Robert Kennedy himself did and sacrificed his life for, to reopen the investigation and to get you out of prison. So that's been a really, really interesting dynamic of this case. That the very victims themselves said, nope, let him out. So
I did want to pull this up because I mentioned it before, and you kind of looked at me like I've never heard that before. So I'm going to play it just so there's a little bit of proof on it.
We just won. Said, we're coming after you. We're coming up to Illinois to get you. And it was just, and they were buddies, but it was fun. And frankly, literally at that point, speech was terrific. At the end of the speech, we had Bill Barry, it was a New York detective, Steve Smith was his son-in-law, and then Roosevelt Greer, Rayford Johnson, the two football players. We walked. Bobby said, Ethel, you go out on the front entrance. We're going to go out and we'll meet you. We're going to be over there with Frank Sinatra, et cetera, and Peter Lawford for a party that night, and we will meet you. In other words, you go out the front, and we'll meet you in back.
It just came out.
Wow,
There's a new website.
Doesn't matter. That was the only point I wanted to show you anyway. The whole point is that now his name is similar to another witness, but it is Richard Corbett. There's a Corbett in this case. But I saw that, I heard that, and now another thing I wanted to show here is that if you know anything about the Natalie Wood case, Sheriff Peter Pitches was a good friend of Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra had spoken out about Thomas Noguchi, who's another name that's involved in the RFK case, because Thomas Noguchi did a whole speech talking about a drunk actress that fell off a boat, another Hollywood damsel in distress type situation. Sinatra got angry because he was close friends with Natalie Wood. That relationship, depending on who you ask, might go a little bit deeper, like kind of that he knew her since she was like a child and kind of groomed her in a sense. But Peter Pitches, the LA person, had covered up certain instances where he let Robert Wagner and he let Christopher Walken leave in a helicopter before the wife's body was even identified, which is very suspicious. But this name came up, and now it's JFK assassination related. But conspiracy inquiry by inspection staff, possible leak in Dallas. It says the director approved contacting Sheriff Peter Pitches of Los Angeles County to request his assistance. This was done on Friday last, and Pitches had reported back to GRAP that a subordinate, Captain Ray Holt, learned of an existence of the report from the Los Angeles Police Department. Holt told Pitches that the copy in question was furnished to the Los Angeles Police Department by contacts in the Dallas, Texas Police Department, who in turn received it from an unknown special agent of the FBI. Holt had no further particulars. Pitches expressed great concern of the consequences for him if police sources learned of his cooperation with the Bureau in this matter. On Friday last, Inspector H.L. Edwards contacted Mayor Eric Johnson of Dallas. Mayor Johnson was extremely cooperative and agreed to call in Dallas police officers V.J. Bryan and T.J. Wardlaw. Because of the holiday, these men were not available to work until morning. After being warned by the mayor of the seriousness of these problems, these men were interviewed privately by Inspector Edwards. Both men said they had no idea why their prints appear on the copy. Edwards said these interviews were unsatisfactory, but it says down here, Edwards then immediately proceeded to contact Lieutenant Jack Revel, who was in charge of the Criminal Intelligence Unit of Dallas Police Department. Lieutenant Revel is a Dallas police officer who attributed certain remarks to Special Agent James Hosty Jr. at the time of the Kennedy assassination. Revel admitted responsibility in this matter. He said that he obtained the Dallas copy from an agent of the Dallas office in July or August 1965. And I'm just saying, for me, it's weird. I've never come across Pitch's name, but doing the whole Natalie Wood stuff, and I looked up his name on the Mary Farrell site. There's a few documents in there, but it seems like they were mostly like slow coordinating with the FBI, and it seems like Pitches was doing the same thing with the Natalie Wood case that he was doing with the RFK case, that he was also doing with the JFK case. And I wondered why his name popped up in all three, which I think is suspicious. I mean, we don't have really a lot of names that pop up in all three certain cases, unless you're talking about like a name like oh God, who was the guy that was at the RFK assassination and the JFK assassination? He's got a name out there. If someone can leave it in the comments, but there is a person whose office was right next to a CIA office that was in like some type of building. I'm blanking on his name right now. I know someone's going to leave it in the comments or someone's screaming at me right now about it. But there's very weird few names that have these types of connections leak through. So I just thought that was interesting as a fan of the JFK assassination and researching the RFK assassination and Natalie Wood. It was something that popped up there, but it lends a little bit more credence to what that guy said about Frank Sinatra being at the Ambassador. And I don't know if you've ever heard that before. I had come across him saying that. I had to stop it a couple times and be like, hang on a second. Is that possible? But knowing Sheriff Peter Pitch's name being involved, it makes it a little bit more likely because now I have kind of two things of evidence here.
No, absolutely. I think this speaks to if we do reinvestigate RFK's assassination, this is one of the things that absolutely has to be investigated, because it is so strange to have not only witnesses but also law enforcement.
Well, who was the main guy in the Chicago police when it came to Fred Hampton, the main governor or the mayor of that little spot that was covering up a lot of things that were going on with the Black Panthers and certain actions against them, brutality?
Well, you're talking about either the state's attorney's office, or you're talking about the FBI. Both of them did, and both of them probably colluded in order to do it. But you're talking about Edward Hanrahan, or the person who was in charge of the FBI office in Chicago, which was Marlon Johnson. So yeah, that obviously is something that has to be delved into, and especially in the RFK, JFK, and Natalie Wood case. I don't know that much about Natalie Wood's case, but of course, if you're going to be a medical examiner, the chief medical examiner in the county that has Hollywood, you're going to have a lot of high profile cases. And the fact that Noguchi said something disparagingly about Natalie Wood, look, celebrity MEs or medical examiners, sometimes they say stupid things. Cyril Wecht, God rest his soul, he said stupid stuff. And these are highly touted experts in their fields, with credentials as long as your arm. So, but if you're a celebrity and you're in the media a lot, you're going to say stupid things. And the fact that Thomas Noguchi did, I'm going to chalk that off to that. But as far as, excuse me, as far as Frank Sinatra and his presence in the Ambassador Hotel, again, please, listeners and viewers, keep in mind that the Ambassador Hotel was taken over by the Kennedys and all of their friends and a lot of celebrities, especially in LA, who either wanted to be around Kennedy or was asked to be around Kennedy because of the nonstop parties and just functions that they had in the course of the campaign. And certainly, I do not recall ever coming across this, but it would not surprise me at all. I mean, with as far as Peter Lawford and Steve Smith and all of the other Kennedy family, or even in-laws, who knew a lot of high-profile celebrities, that they would be in and or around the Ambassador Hotel. The itinerary for that evening that he was shot included a party, and now I can't remember the place. Do you remember the nightclub that they were going to? I can't remember, but there was going to be a party, a celebratory party at an offsite nightclub somewhere in Los Angeles.
The Silver Spur.
Sure.
It's Jack Ruby's club.
But instead of going from his acceptance speech or his victory speech down to a party or out to a party, it was Robert Kennedy was persuaded to have a press conference first, to speak directly to the press. So that's why the Colonial Room was used and why he was being led to that. After that, then they were going to go to the party. So whether Frank Sinatra was up on the 5th floor, which was the Kennedy suite, the entire floor was just, the Kennedy's entourage, whether he was up there like with Peter Lawford, or he was already at the club awaiting the party's arrival, I'm not sure. But it does not surprise me if it would not surprise me if Frank Sinatra was in fact there. And would just be leading to more coincidences about both the RFK and JFK case.
I want to ask you one kind of final question here, but would you be surprised that there's probably a number of witnesses that we're not going to be able to document that were inside of the pantry at the time based on just I wouldn't say lack of investigative work, but just on people not feeling the need to give a statement on certain things?
Well, I think earlier you clamored about having a RFK database of eyewitnesses, and that's what I've been working on for the last 30 years. The project of the JFK case unfortunately overshadowed that. So I concentrated on the map of Dealey Plaza and the witnesses in the JFK assassination, and RFK fell to the wayside. Then, of course, other events in my life made going back to RFK that much harder. But now there's been a resurgence. I've committed myself to creating a map of the pantry and the ancillary rooms around it, and plotting the witnesses on that map, and then creating the master list of witnesses for the RFK case. So Tim Smith, another frequent guest of yours, and I, because we're both Michiganians or Michiganders, we were working together to get this thing finished by June, which is the next anniversary of Robert Kennedy's assassination. One of the things that I've tasked Tim to do is to find out who is still alive. I mean, based on the description, well, the LAPD, I'll give a nod at least to them for doing this. Whoever they interviewed, they also included their date of birth. And based on that, and based on the witnesses that I've already compiled, which is, I think I'm up to 260 something witnesses, based on the description of who they, what they were doing at the time, whether they were a high school, college student, or that they worked for the Young Professionals for Kennedy, or they were a Kennedy girl, another group of volunteers for the Kennedy campaign, or based on their date of birth. Tim is going to try to contact as many of these people as possible to find out if they are still alive, and if in fact they will be amiable to an interview or a re-interview, as the case may be. And if we are able to locate these witnesses and ask them questions, it's not just going to be about the actual event itself, but also the aftermath. How, in fact, they were treated by the LAPD. Is this statement that is on record, is this accurate? Did you, in fact, say this? If not, why or what? So I still hold out a lot of hope, because even though we are almost 60 years removed from the event, thankfully enough young people were there and involved in the campaign that it's quite possible that we can still interview them and still get their oral histories down. So whether or not that's going to really affect any particular slant on the investigation, or whether there's going to be a new revelation about the event itself, I guess that's not what I'm really hoping for. I'm just hoping to complete the record as much as possible. And if a witness has something to say and they were overlooked or undermined in 1968, I'd like to try to rectify that. And like I said, make the record as complete as possible.
Well, Craig, where can people find your links? And I do appreciate the work you have done for the JFK case and the RFK case and the Fred Hampton assassination as well, too. It's great work. I'm always very grateful when you're able to do the show and everything like that, and educate my audience and me a little bit more on the assassinations.
And I can't thank you enough for the time and the interest. And you're doing an excellent job with your shorts and with these kind of podcasts, these episodes, to really illuminate these pivotal historical events that, given the sacrifices that these people have made, and the fact that they gave their lives for the work that they were doing, the least that we can do is try to make sure that justice is done on their behalf. So I appreciate all the efforts that you've made. The only link that I have at this point is craigciccone.blog. That will lead you to the JFK map of Dealey Plaza and the eyewitness database that you can order online. And then hopefully in June, I'll be able to add RFK to that. And then I do have fredhampton.blog, which I'm working to add more materials to that, but you can find my stuff there.
And now we'll link all your links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting with you again. And for anybody listening out there who wants to look back at Craig's past episodes, I also have playlists on the YouTube channel. You can find the RFK episodes, JFK episodes, the witness database for the JFK assassination and the RFK assassination, or just type in RFK on Google with the little two decimal mark signs, and then you can do the same thing with JFK, and I'm pretty sure any of my clips will pop up in the videos. So you could look at some of the names on there, some of the documentation to be able to follow exactly what is being described, and it's narrated by a voice actor friend of mine. I recommend it just because it's getting harder and harder to try and drop a name of somebody, of a witness, and they're like, who's that? I'm like, fucking Google it, buddy. It's there now, okay? We got it in video format. So I appreciate everybody for listening. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share the episode if you want, and please check out Craig's work. He's done excellent work on the maps and documenting these witnesses, and also the work of Tim Smith. I can't thank them enough. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank, and stay tuned for our next episode.